Hopefully the sound quality is good, but this video is going to be quickly on, well, not quickly, but on forgiveness. I still am working on the word study of healing. Not trying to worry about that, God's timing and all that. But I was just scrolling through a little bit of social media and saw a video on someone talking about forgiveness. And I just felt an urge to, like, you should make a video about that. And so basically I'm going to be hitting multiple parts, the structures of, I'm going to be sharing personal stories of, things that have been done to me forgiving others, what I've done to other people, the necessity of forgiveness, certain levels of forgiveness, and trying to use personal stories. And also identifying the uber religious or the spirit of the Pharisee trap that it seems a lot of people get sucked into. So I hope you listen to the whole video. I don't know if everything's gonna apply to you, but if one little bit of this video helps you out, cool. Walk in. So first on the notes, when it talks about forgiveness, I've had to, I've learned that the more God's forgiven me, the easier it is for me to forgive other people, because when I realize, not only does one sin, separate you from God, and thank God Jesus died on the cross and restored that relationship, but it also shows, when I realize the depth of my sins, who am I to not forgive others for anything? And not saying I perfectly do it all the time, because none of us are perfect, to the point of we don't even forgive perfectly. It is a process that we all are working on, So I've heard, you put a microscope to my life on every little thing, you're going to find imperfections. And even now, the way I forgive people isn't perfect. There's probably some people I'm closer to true forgiveness than others. Through the grace of God covers where I fall short, and He's continuing to work with me in all facets. And I'll share what I mean by this. So I picked 3 stories of which that I struggled to forgive others, and I'm at actually different stages with all of them in forgiveness. First one was there was a time I was 20 years old when I was, under the influence of drugs. I was taken advantage of and sexually molested. Yeah, not a very high point in my life. And that screwed me up for years. In fact, it took me I even had nightmares about the event, drank real heavily. There's a lot of things I used to try to bury that hurt. And it took me years to forgive this gentleman, to the point where, the guy's totally forgiven. Doesn't mean I'm going to be his homie and hang out with him, no. Because of the damage that's been done, if I were ever to meet the guy, I still wouldn't feel comfortable around this guy. But I could forgive him, and if it was me and him sitting in front of the, God's throne, and God turned to me and goes, hey man, if it was up to you whether this guy would go to heaven or hell based on what he's done for you, what would you choose? And I'd talk to God, please forgive him. God makes the final choice, but not forgiving someone is like putting spiritual chains on them and not allowing them, or at least making it more difficult for them to move forward. Second one, damaged vehicle. My dad gifted me one of his vehicles, and long story short, when the Lord was working on my heart and showing kindness to other people and practically applying it, I let a gentleman borrow my vehicle, and long story short, he got extremely inebriated when I wasn't around and totaled the car. And to this day, I think it's still broken to where it got damaged at. And I remember when I got back to the place that it happened at, you know, and the guy, he was just, I think, getting moved out of the work area environment because the boss knew what happened and whatnot. I remember I seen him in the hallway, and I was walking to him, and the guy was looking at me. You know, his head was down. He knew what he had done, and you know, in the environment that we were at, you know, I think he wouldn't be surprised if I came up and just like socked him in the jaw or something. You know, it's 2005 Honda Ridgeline, blew the transmission, popped the tires. I mean, the thing was toast. You know, and it was my dad's gift for me that many years ago, I think my mom got for my dad, or one of them got for each other for their silver anniversary. You know, there's a lot of sentimentality behind it, but I remember walking up to him, I remember poking him in the chest and be like, hey man, I don't care about the vehicle, that's an earthly possession. What I care about is your heart and where your spirit is. Because at the end of the day, we're all gonna die, and all this stuff's going to pass away, and it's like what truly matters is your eternity and where you're going. You know, some things hurt a little more than others, but it's just stuff. Third one, abandoned lease, theft, financial damage. Had a guy who I got tied in with financially. Long story short, he jumped out the lease, stole about half the things in the house, and then it cost me about $5,000 in immediate financial damage. Lord actually took care of me on that part, and that's a story for another time. And kind of lied about a whole bunch of things, and it caught me off guard and hurt more because I knew this dude for like 15 years or so. And I didn't, you know, it took me probably about a year and a half to let that go and to forgive him. And then also my immediate reaction, because after he did all that damage, you know, I came back to an apartment that was cleared out, and then the power was getting shut off, and they told me I'd only been making half payments, which was me making my side of the payments. And they're like, yeah, you know, you still owed this many in rent, this much in electric, and the Lord provided for me that I was able to pay it off just enough. And then he tried to come back in the apartment without a word, and I told him we didn't have a place there, and I maced him, which was not the correct way to handle it. And well, ended up getting charged with that. But anywho, there's three different, and I got stories for days, but the point is that it took me different times to forgive these gentlemen for what they had done to me. And then not only on top of that, when the Lord was teaching me how to forgive and how do you know you've truly forgiven somebody? You know, where should you be at? And even Jesus showed this to me when he manifested himself, you know, and I got to meet him in a dream. You know you've truly forgiven someone when you can treat them and talk to them and interact with them as if they had never like hurt you, or what they did to you does not affect you in any way, shape, or form. Not saying to completely forget about it. Like, you know, if someone stabs me in the chest and I forgive them, I'm probably not going to hang around the guy, you know, because I might be in physical danger. That's not smart. That's not wisdom. So, you know, like it took me, you know, so it's not only forgiving them verbally, and if I was to forgive them in person, it's to treat them and hang out with them as if they had never hurt me. You know, I remember when I was meeting Jesus, he didn't visit me when I was doing great in my life and everything was going great. It was actually when I was upset, angry, I was doing poor, and because of my earthly circumstance, I was basically telling him that I was just going to start doing things my way, because after doing things his way for so long and shit wasn't looking good from an earthly perspective, like, I'm going to do it, you know, screw this. I've spent 30 years doing it this way. I'm going to do it my way. And in the midst of that rebellion is when he visited me. And he didn't condemn me. He didn't like harass me. He wasn't like naming out all my sins. You know, he sat down. He was telling stories. We were joking and we were laughing and having a great time. And he treated me like I was his best friend, even in the midst of, let's call it, direct opposition. So that kind of, it's like, looking back on it, it's like, damn, I've done all these things. You came to me at one of the lowest points of my life, actions-wise, and you treated me like I was your best friend, and like you were happy to see me, you know, things like that. And so he set the example of how I should treat other people. Now, sharing these stories, guess what? Might surprise you, but I'm not exactly walking on water over here. You know, I have stories on stories on stories of how I've hurt other people in every way, shape, or form you could possibly imagine. If someone tries telling you, you know, that, oh, I don't do anything, I don't do this, I don't, you know, sorry, nobody's perfect, you're not going to convince me otherwise. And just because you got those uber religious people who pretend they're walking on water, sorry, everyone sins. Pretty much every day, you know. Someone tells me they got their stuff together, well, you better start writing your book on how you achieve perfection for the rest of us. So I'm not innocent. You know, here's 3 things I've done. And I share these because I know some people who will do, I've also been the target of it, where because of my imperfections, someone's told me that I'm not born again, I'm not saved, I'm going to hell, or you know, I don't believe in Jesus, or I'm not a Christ follower. It's like, because I've been imperfect. Or some people, you know, will be astonished at what somebody did, and then they'll tell you, well, you can't be a real Christ follower if you insert some kind of sin. You know, to God, sin is sin. Yeah, the uber, you know, who are shocked, like, you know, like, oh, you can follow Christ and doing small sins, it's okay. But if you hit this level of sin, it's like, oh no, that disqualifies you. It's like, no, sin is sin. You know, I've been born again and saved since I was in children's church, and that hasn't changed in the past 3 decades. You know, let's see, 3 things. I've been involved with witchcraft, which at its core is rebelling with God. Yeah, I spent 3 months delving into that stuff, which actually tied into what I said earlier, because, well, I was pretty much uber angry that where I was at wasn't where I wanted to be, and I saw the rest of the world doing everything they wanted to do, and I, you know, just at a low point, just like, screw it, I'm going to do what I want to do, pursue what I want to pursue, and bada bing, bada boom. I mean, that's stories for later. I could talk about that all day long. I've dishonored my parents with my words. You know, I've said some of the most horrendous things that I can think of to my parents, you know, when I've been angry or whatnot. You know, probably the specific one that gets brought to mind is when I was 17 years old, 16 years old. I remember being so angry and just felt so cold that I remember telling my, you know, and I don't like saying it even out loud, even if it's years past, and we made up from it, but I remember telling her that, you know, I told her I was so frustrated and so like disconnected from my emotions that if, you know, if she were to die, I wouldn't cry at her funeral. And I remember after I graduated boot camp and I'd come back and I'd forgotten about it, and she brought it up to me and asked me if I really meant it, and, you know, I told her I was sorry, and that no, I didn't mean it. It was just where my head was at in that situation, which made me say that. So, you know, that's pretty, I'm not going to go into everything I've said, but I'm being open about this because, you know, I've had some people come up to me, you know, and there's this one woman who was talking about something she had done, and she felt like she didn't feel forgiven, and that she didn't know if she was able to be redeemed from a certain sin that she had done, because in her head, you know, it was that evil or this or that, you know, outside of blasphemy, which as far as I'm tracking is just rejecting the Holy Spirit, you know, rejecting the gift of salvation. You can come back from anything. I mean, look at David. He, you know, to put it bluntly, he murdered a man and then screwed the man's wife, and, you know, he's called a man after God's own heart. You know, Saul, who later became Paul, murdered hundreds, if not thousands, of Christians, you know, and it's easy to disassociate from the story, but to put it in real perspective, was that one shooter who went and shot up a church, you know, and he killed like a dozen people or something like that. Imagine that guy would go church to church and start murdering people, and then by the time they arrested him, they're like, oh yeah, this guy just went to like 30 different churches and murdered 1,200 people. You know, most of this country, and I can tell you a lot of the church would be like, that man deserves to go to hell, and I hope he burns for eternity, yada yada. You know, but in the Bible, there was a guy who was doing the same thing, and then God used him, and he had one of the greatest testimonies that we know to mankind. So back to that story, you know, and I was talking to her and showing her some verses, just like, no, it's just, repent, confess your sins to God, ask for his forgiveness, and you're good. And just do your best to sin no more. Not saying you're going to be perfect from here on out, not saying you're not going to fall again, because a righteous man falls 7 times and a righteous man gets back up. You know, it doesn't say a righteous man falls, loses his salvation, then he gets back up and regains his righteousness and salvation. You know, a righteous man is going to fall 7 times. We're all going to sin. We're just supposed to get back up and continue on. I physically hurt people close to me. Yeah, that guy who screwed me over financially and a whole bunch of other things. Yeah, I ended up, I was so mad at him that when he came back and I told him he needed to leave 3 times, and when he didn't, I ended up macing him. Was not smart. I mean, I've heard people have tried to tell me that if they were in my situation, they would have done worse. Point being is that I acted out of anger. That was the wrong way to treat him. I was at a ranch, and there was a guy I was getting into a verbal argument with, and when he tried to say, oh, you're just posturing, and oh boy, that was a weakness I had to work on. Told me I was posturing, I ended up punching him in the face. And we had a heart-to-heart like 15 minutes after that, and we were both open about why we reacted the way we did, and we realized we both had like our triggers or even wounds from the past that caused us to interact the way we did. We were able to forgive each other, move on, and we actually took the initiative to help each other work on what caused that situation, which is pretty awesome. So if you think I'm being a holier than thou, walking on water, no. In fact, just like what Paul said, where, I'd rather boast in my weaknesses just to glorify God all the more. Because I can be this screwed up of a human being. I'm forgiven, and look at what God can do for me. If he can do all this for me, he can do the same for you, if not more. That's what forgiveness is all about. So forgiveness takes time. It's not always immediate. There's levels to forgiveness, but from what I found is that true forgiveness is when you can interact with those that hurt you as if they had never hurt you. Something I would like to warn too is that just because you can't immediately perfectly forgive somebody, don't worry about it. God will grow each and every one of us to teach us how to forgive, and he will show us how we need to forgive, and then he'll show us the next level, and he just keeps growing us in our ability to forgive. And if you feel like, the spirit of condemnation, or, because Satan will use, it's like, oh, you haven't forgiven him perfectly. It's just like, hey, God's grace is sufficient. He covers your inability to forgive someone the perfect way, but though God's going to continue to help you grow and forgive people appropriately. It's a work in progress. Don't stress it. For the uber religious crowd, I had shared a video once about a prophetic dream that I had. And I remember I said, I actually did it once in this video, so it's perfectly applicable. I said, shit. And someone was like, oh, I know a true follower of God wouldn't say that. And they tried to basically denounce my message, denounce me, denounce everything about me because I let loose a curse word. Should I have said it? No, it was in the moment. That's something I'm working on, and that can be taken in another video. But to say to completely disavow everything that I said because I had a imperfection, I got it in that video. I said, hey, if your biggest fault against me is that I said a curse word, I'm doing actually pretty well. But I always go back, and this could be a tool for others, that if people want to try to stick you, question you, or put you down in your faith with God because they know about one of your imperfections or sins, which is ironic because nobody's perfect, so who are they to say anything? I always point to Galatians 3:11. I believe it's in one of the letters where Paul was talking about how he had to correct Peter, the Peter that we know, one of the 12 disciples, where Peter had I believe it was an insecurity, or where he was posing when he would hang out with the Gentiles and whatnot, But being Jewish, when Jewish leaders would come over, you know, to talk or interact, he would suddenly shun the Gentiles and he would hang out with the Jews, and he would go back to his old ways because he wanted to fit in. And so and in the verse it says, and in that Peter was leading people astray. So it's like, you shouldn't listen to this guy because he found a sin. Well, guess what? Paul committed a sin. Peter committed a sin. Should we just kind of discount the whole book of Acts and all the letters to the churches that Paul wrote because they were imperfect? No, we listen to them anyways. That's not the point. Let's see. Also, holier than thou, use the Marine uniform for correcting a brother. The difference between helping and being a holier than thou. So to discredit somebody when they say they're a Christian because they've sinned, I try to use a metaphor like this. Guess what? I use being a Marine as an example. I did my boot camp, did the Crucible, hiked the Reaper. I earned my EGA. Does that mean I'm a perfect Marine? No. There's another brother I have, he earned his EGA. I use the uniform example. We're walking around in our dress blues and I noticed that he has a ketchup stain on his NCO belt. Do I sit there and go, oh, you're not a real Marine, stolen valor, you're a piece of because I found something wrong with your uniform? No. I'm going to pull you to the side. I'm like, hey, brother, this is an issue. It needs to get fixed. And now, according to the, log in my eye and the splinter in their eye, I'm going to make sure my belt's good to go first, so that not only can I correct him, I can show him how the uniform needs to be presented, and I correct him. And if he doesn't want to listen, hey, that's when I grab a couple more brothers. If he doesn't listen, then I grab the elders or staff NCOs in this example. And that's how we should address it. Just because I'm correcting somebody on something in their walk, because I've done it before, where hey man, you like, why are you sleeping with this chick when you're not married? How are you gonna, I'm like, you shouldn't be doing that. And then he tells me I'm coming off as a holier than thou. It's like, no, there's just because I'm correcting you doesn't mean I'm holier than you. I am just trying to help you. As if I'm messing up, you should be helping me. We're supposed to help each other. I've also had people where, because they've identified something that I've messed up in my life, they will use that as a way to say that I can't correct anybody. And then they'll use, fix the plank in your eye first. And it's like the plank and the needle, the stick, the twig, the speck in, before you inspect the speck in their eye, it's like, that's basically supposed to be hypocrisy. If you're doing drugs, smoking weed, screwing people out of marriage, lying to everything and being a thief, and let's say I'm working on my stuff and I have the potty mouth, right? I'm like, F this, screw that, dropping these left and right. And I come up to you and I'm like, hey man, you shouldn't be sleeping outside marriage. And you go, oh, but you cuss. You can't correct me on this because you're not perfect. Because I know something, like, now if I'm screwing a woman out of marriage and he's screwing a woman out of marriage, yeah, I should probably fix myself before I correct him, because I'm being a hypocrite if I'm doing the same thing I'm correcting. But just because I'm correcting someone else, and you can scan my whole life up and down and find one thing I'm doing wrong, and you can just, completely disavow me, that's not the correct application of that verse. So I think that point is pretty much going across. Let's see. A verse, forgetting, for I will be merciful towards their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more. So this is the last point I'm going to press on, having to do with wisdom. If that gentleman who hurt me financially, honestly, I like the guy. We just had our character defaults, and his ended up affecting me, and I got hurt because of it. As far as I know, he has his own character defects. I don't think at his core he was a malicious human being. I think he's a good dude at the core. He just has some character flaws that severely impacted me. And hopefully someday I would like to restore the friendship with him. I haven't been able to hit him up since we departed from each other, but I hope he's doing well. Now, if I were to resume a friendship with the guy I called best friend for almost 2 decades, would I put myself in a situation that could jeopardize my finances with him? Like, would I, if he needed to get a car, would I, co-sign with him or something? No. Because I've remembered that he was a default or an issue that he had, and I'm not going to put myself in jeopardy. Also, the Bible says don't take up someone else's debt. But the point is, well, if you truly forgave him, doesn't that mean you forgot his sin or what he did to you? It's like, no, that's not executing wisdom. And then that verse was God saying, I will remember their sins no more. And there's a couple more too you can find in Isaiah. So I'm sitting there going, well, if God will forget my sin, aren't I supposed to forget others? And so this is what I would suggest people do their own research on, because I haven't done the complete study on it. But from what I'm tracking there's 2 trains of thoughts there. And forgiveness, as in that he literally can't remember it. From what I'm tracking, at least in the context of the way it's supposed to be used, is that God doesn't he separates your sins from east to the west. He doesn't literally forget, I can't remember. No, but he remembers the sin no more, as in the way he treats you. When he, judgment and all that, or when he holds you accountable, it will be as if you had never sinned. Because we're already forgiven through Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. So when it comes to the judgment throne or whatnot, it will not be brought up. He does not hold those sins against us. So I am not going to treat others. I'm not going to hold their sins against them. I'm going to forgive them. But I'm still going to exercise discernment in how I interact with people because of what they've done. So it's just wisdom being used there. So anywho, that's all I got for this video. It was put upon my heart to address all these things. If anyone wants to make a comment about something specific, I'll do my best to address it. We'll make a short addressing it or whatnot, but yeah, that's about it. Hopefully you got something out of this.